Hi, I'm Stephen Feinberg, Executive Director of the Rhode Island Film and Television Office. Our guest tonight is a cinematic icon. He's a wizard in special effects and a phenomenal filmmaker. He's done films from 2001, Blade Runner, Close Encounters, and I am so jazzed to have you as our guest here on Double Feature. Douglas Trumbull, welcome.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to jump right in. How did you get started in movies at a very young age, pre-2001?
Well, I was a young guy reading science fiction when I was in high school, in junior high school. I was a big science fiction fan. And as I started becoming an artist, my portfolio was filled with science fiction type stuff, alien planets and spacecraft and stars and planets. And so that ultimately led to kind of a career doing space films for the government at a company called Graphic Films in LA. And then that company, Graphic Films, did a film which I worked on called To the Moon and Beyond in the New York World's Fair. And that was seen by Stanley Kubrick and Arthur Clarke, projected on this giant 70mm dome screen. And they said, yes, that's what we need for 2001. The whole movie was a big research and development project because no one knew where we were going to go or how we were going to do it. It had never been done like that before. Right. And Kubrick and Clarke were actually continuing to develop the story while we were shooting the film. So the script was changing every day.
Wow.
Because we would learn something every day and then he would change the next day, et cetera. So that went on throughout the entire production because it was an exploration of cinema. It was Cinerama, 70mm, right. These giant 90-foot, 100-foot wide screens. There were about maybe 54 of those theaters around the world in major cities.
Yeah.
And special 70mm projectors and multi-channel sound systems.
It was a real event.
It was a real event. It was really spectacular. And Kubrick felt a kind of a responsibility to make something epically big for this big screen. And that started influencing his directorial style.
And he also was a rule breaker, right? He was a guy who's, like yourself, you guys were, there's a simpatico. Yeah. As far as personality, you guys are you're visionaries, you're rule breakers, you try to do things that haven't been done before.
Yeah.
So how did that work into his style, so to speak?
Well, I mean, there were several aspects of it. One was that Kubrick is, or was, he's no longer alive, but a genius level man and very intelligent and very thoughtful and really trying to do something new and different that no one had ever seen before, and wanted to explore new territory. And he had no fear about taking risks or trying to do something that had never been done. He says, well, we're going to figure it out and we're going to do it and we're going to succeed. That was his attitude.
Yeah.
And he was my mentor, really. This was film school for me, working with Kubrick. And so we got along great. And it turned out that because I was starting as a young, almost an apprentice level guy, I was doing animation. And my first job on 2001 was figuring out how to make these fake computer readouts for HAL.
Oh, right.
And so we started doing that, and he said, well, boy, Doug's pretty good at that, and so I'll give him something a little harder. And I would do that, and then something a little harder. And over the course of the movie, I worked my way up until I was one of the four heads of the entire.
And everything seemed real. I mean, it had to have a sense of realism.
It had to be real, and it had to be extremely high quality. There was no room for error. There could be no flaw. There could be no scratch. There could be no piece of bad paint on a set or a miniature. It had to be perfect.
There's so much to talk about 2001 because it was so groundbreaking, and there's so many iconic images. Let's talk about that last sequence.
Well, the last sequence at near the end of the movie, they've arrived at their destination because some signal has been sent from the moon to Jupiter, and they don't know why, so they've gone to Jupiter to figure out why. And at Jupiter, they find this monolith orbiting one of the moons of Jupiter. They say, well, that's part of the puzzle, because there was one of them on the moon. And they get close to the monolith, and we had a really hard time trying to figure, well, what do we do now? Because the storyboards and the original story written by Clarke called for a slot to be revealed, kind of a monolith-shaped slot in the planet.
Like a door.
Like a door. And so if you look down the slot, you'd see another universe at the other end of the slot. That was how it was originally written. And so we're all thinking about, well, how do we do that? How do we make it look good? We did storyboard drawings that are interesting but impossible to film. And we started talking a lot about this whole issue of transforming through time and space, and that these beings are somehow omniscient and omnipotent, and time and space is irrelevant, and you can be anywhere at any time, and so time and space has to be broken. And Kubrick did this one really cool shot that he worked out with his cinematographer, which is Keir Delay, who's playing Bowman, is in this close-up, and he's looking at this Stargate thing, and he's starting to be buffeted by something happening. And what they did was they kept shaking Keir Delay in a chair and slowly slowing the camera down from 24 frames a second down to 1 frame a second.
Wow.
And then compensating the iris in the camera so the exposure stayed constant. So he just starts blurring more and more and more to where he progressively becomes abstracted into this blurry, quivering shape. And then you cut to the Stargate, which is this corridor of light. And that was all done in a similar way. It was a controlled blur. And if you can imagine, if you just were in a dark room like this and you moved a flashlight while the shutter of the camera was open, you'd see a streak of light exposed onto the film. Well, we started figuring out how to control that, and we had a bar of light we called a slit, lit from behind. Artwork was passing behind the slit, and then the camera was moving toward the slit, so you accumulate a plane of light with patterns on it as a result of the moving artwork, which was op art and colored gels and filters and things. And it created this abstract corridor of light, for lack of a better description.
Which no one had ever seen before.
No one had ever seen before, and it created the abstract traveling through space and time that was necessary for the movie. And then the movie becomes increasingly abstract after that, you know, one shot after another of these most amazing exploding galaxies and supernovas and planetary surfaces. And
I think you almost have to see that film every 5 years to get some kind of new education about the film. Every time I see it, I'm going, oh, I didn't notice that, or I didn't experience that.
Well, the movie, in a way, it became kind of a 60s light show.
Yes.
Like a light show being the kind of things they do at a rock and roll concert,
right.
where they just project all over the walls and ceiling with liquids and stars and strobe lights and all this kind of stuff. And initially, the movie was not successful. It was badly reviewed. No one in the normal critical movie reviewing world knew what to make out of this movie. They didn't understand it at all.
Right.
And about 30 days into the release of 2001, the studio was ready to abandon the movie and pull the plug. They said, there's nobody who gets it. The reviews are bad and there's nobody in the theater. Until one of the guys at the MGM publicity department said, let's call it The Ultimate Trip. They rebranded the movie The Ultimate Trip, and people started smoking a little pot and going and sitting in the front row.
Right.
And they're just saying, wow, whoa, this is awesome.
And I would hear that. I hear that.
So that was really part of the transformation of people's understanding of what Kubrick was trying to do as a filmmaker, was to transport the audience to another dimension.
And then Ridley Scott, I saw in an interview, he said Blade Runner came around, he goes, I refuse to make the movie without the help of Doug Trumbull. I won't make the movie without Doug Trumbull.
Well, I wish I had known that when I negotiated my salary.
Well, I am letting you know. How was that experience? And
it was great.
Iconic imagery of Hades, and you did all that.
Yeah, that was right after Close Encounters. And Ridley's movie was kind of the beneficiary of Close Encounters because we'd solved a lot of problems. We built the first motion control systems. We figured out how to do lens flares and glows and all this kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of similarity visual between Close Encounters and Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Like the blimp in Blade Runner kind of looks like the mothership in a way if you think about it consciously. You might not notice it immediately, but the UFOs in Close Encounters are similar to the spinners flying around in Blade Runner. And Blade Runner was actually a very low-budget movie at the time. And so we didn't have a lot of money to do anything, so we had to be really clever and really fast. And during Blade Runner, I was about to direct Brainstorm. So I had to make a deal with Ridley. I said, you know, I'm going to have to move on, and so is Richard Jurisic, my partner. He's going to be my director of photography. So we just figured out a way to transition out of Blade Runner right at the end of it.
Wow.
So the effects shooting was still going on under a guy named Dave Dreyer that we appointed.
Yep.
trained and showed him everything we wanted to do. He did a beautiful job finishing stuff up for us, and, carrying on the style that we set for the movie.
I mean, come on. All these movies that we're talking about, they all stand the test of time, which is unbelievable.
Yeah, it's one of the things I'm really proud of because I like what I call organic effects and miniatures.
Yeah, I love it.
And I think that there's certain difficulties with computer graphics.
They're
too relied on today.
I want to talk about that too because one of my friends who is he's an artist and he loves special effects and he was saying too, he goes, I see these films now with the CGI and there's something that's on a lot of it, there's something missing. But then you'll see Blade Runner or you'll see 2001, which is his favorite film. And there's something that there's something real. It feels real.
Yeah, well, they age gracefully because a really good miniature, for example, whether it's a space station or a rock,
Yeah.
if it's built as well as a set would have been built, it's going to continue to be as real as Casablanca has continued to be real for Rick's Cafe.
Right.
But when it's CGI, which is based on algorithms and shaders and texture maps and stuff like that, they don't age very well because that art form is continuing to develop.
And evolve. Right.
So you can see a really terrific looking movie this year, but if you look back 3 years in the future, it will age not gracefully. It might not look as good as what you're seeing currently.
Doug, are there any words of wisdom you might want to share with our young filmmakers, people who are watching, that you could share with them?
Well, any young filmmaker today, coming up through the ranks or just starting, whatever, is no longer going to be shooting film, right?
Right.
There's almost no film laboratories left.
Correct.
That's over with. And this young budding filmmaker can get a DSLR or a GoPro or whatever kind of, you can get a really inexpensive camera that can do a pretty good job. And you can edit it, you can take that right out of the camera, put it in your laptop, make your movie, you can mix your sound and GarageBand, whatever.
The technology is there.
The technology is totally there. So what we've realized is that it's now time to re-examine some of the things we thought were always true, which are no longer accurate or effective. Like we're carrying along 24 frames a second as a standard because it was invented for optical soundtracks in 1927.
Mm-hmm.
It's time to rethink that because any filmmaker, particularly anybody working in 3D, will see immediately the 24 frames is blurry and very hard to do 3D because the difference between one frame and the next creates a mess. Your brain is saying, I'm getting a headache, my eye convergence is making my eyes uncomfortable, I don't like watching it, it's too dim. And I think it's time to reevaluate where we're going and what we can do because we can still make it look exactly like a movie. Doesn't have to look like a TV show, and we can ramp up the frame rate, get rid of blurring, get rid of strobing, increase the resolution, and that unleashes action. Everybody wants action.
Right.
So I dare you young filmmakers, go put your Blu-ray or DVD in your player, get to the action scene and then freeze it and see how much is really there. And what you'll see is it's blurred. It's almost unrecognizable. So during the action sequence of the big punch or the car chase or the flip or whatever, it's really a mess of unrecorded, blurry, low quality imagery.
Right.
And the funny thing, that's not even funny, it's actually tragic. If it's computer graphics, the studio and the artists have invested a huge amount of money in shaders, texture maps, geometry, architecture, all the kind of stuff to build this synthetic world, right?
Right.
That looks photorealistic. And then in order to make it look okay at 24 frames, they have to
add the blur.
blur it.
They have to add the blur.
And so 99% of what they just paid for is destroyed.
I remember
blur.
even Steven Spielberg when he was doing Jurassic Park and he was talking to Phil Tippett and he said, I need the blur.
Yeah. Well, you need blur at 24 frames.
Right.
Without blur, it doesn't work.
Right.
It looks like an animated cartoon.
Right.
And so blur is critically important for 24 frames. But as you increase the frame rate,
There will
you
be no
need less
blur.
blur.
Right.
And you record more of the action. And so the movie actually becomes much more powerful.
Because it's a
you're much more
lifelike.
kinesthetically involved in the
Right.
movie because you can see everything.
Do you think that 3D is going to be the norm?
Not necessarily. It's very, very big in China. The Chinese don't even want to see a movie that's not 3D.
Yep.
I like that.
Yep.
In this country, 3D is falling off. And I think it's not falling off for the right reasons. It's falling off because the industry has accepted low brightness and low resolution and low frame rate. So it does give you headaches. There is eye strain. There's a lot of bad things about 3D that in many ways is not as good as 2D.
Gotcha.
Because you have to put a filter on the projector, cuts the light in half. Put the glasses on, cuts the light in half again. You end up with a quarter of the light, and it's all blurred. And
that's where the headaches might come from. Not for me, but for
so we
others.
found out if you get the light back,
Right, yeah.
increase the resolution, and increase the frame rate, suddenly 3D becomes like a vivid reality. That's very, very
So
powerful.
it could be the norm with the
I
right
think it could be.
technology.
I'm trying to get
make that
to be
the
back.
norm.
I think we should get
It's more
back.
immersive.
We should, if we don't improve something dramatically, the movie business in theaters is going to die.
Yeah,
Everybody's going to download and stream their movies and watch them on their smartphones or their tablets.
yeah,
It'll be dead. And movie attendance is dropping off.
yeah.
And we got to do something about it. And we got to do something about it that's really profound and fabulous, so that going out to a movie is a real rewarding experience. You know, like going to Cirque du Soleil or a Broadway show.
I trust in Doug Trumbull to make sure that that all happens for us.
We're working on it.
I want to thank you.
Thank you.
So very, very much for your time and your talent and your wisdom and being an educator. I bow.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.